Welcome. We are the Ministry of the Real Truth. And in our personal research, we came across this book, The Aramaic Sayings of Jesus, published by Hodder and Horton. This book is by Basil Fletcher. The sublime simplicity, poetic perfection, and deep human quality of the words of Jesus become freshly apparent in the study of the language Jesus spoke. Here is an attempt to hear, even if faintly, the very accent of Jesus. Okay, we can't really see it, we're just sort of guessing that that's the words, because there's a sticker covering it, a library sticker. Probably published in 1967, something like that, not really sure. Contents page. Introduction. About a year ago, before this book was published, a very simple question struck the author's mind, almost with the force of a blow. It was so simple and obvious that he wondered, had he never asked himself the question before, or more important, why no one else seemed to have asked it and found the answer. The question was this: why are Aramaic words found in the Gospels on 7 occasions and 7 only, often side by side with their translations? The translations are there in our English versions, just as they are in the earliest Greek manuscripts. There seems to be no obvious reason for keeping the Aramaic in these cases rather than in others. As in generally the case, one difficult question led onto others. For example, the author found himself obliged to ask, why did not Jesus take care that a written record was kept of his teaching? Why did he teach in Aramaic and not in Hebrew, the language of the theologians of Judea, or in Greek, the language of so many literate Palestinians? Well, the disciples of Christ, Thomas, Peter, etc., obviously kept the record of what the Christ said and did, as his disciples that were always around them, like 24/7. Somebody wrote it down, and then it was later hidden and preserved, so that answers that question there. He didn't necessarily write it or say write it down. They just wrote it as a record, as testators, or people who were testifying of what he said and did in his years of ministry. Again, because they're the ones hanging around him the most, day in, day out, 24/7, 365. Why did not Jesus take care that a written record was kept of his teaching? Why did he teach in Aramaic and not in Hebrew? Well, it was probably Aramaic and Hebrew, Aramaic Hebrew, because they're probably, in those days, they were probably pretty similar, same words, same meanings, whereas later on it was probably modified by the Masoretes or whoever, modernized, and then they ended up with same words but different meanings, as in Elohim, Elohim, and the Hebrew Elohim, which probably means the God or the gods, or one God, the God, however it's translated in the Hebrew. Why did he teach in Aramaic and not in Hebrew, the language of the theologians of Judea, or in Greek, the language of many literate Palestinians? The author found some of the answers to his questions scattered about in erudite books written by scholars for biblical scholars, and he found some from the recent translations at that time of the Dead Sea Scrolls. He thought he might be performing a service to the unscholarly by adding these answers up and expressing the results in quite simple terms for ordinary Christians. And he wouldn't pretend that this was a work of original scholarship, but he would claim that it presents the teachings of Jesus in a new light, making it both more intimate and more modern. Chapter 1, the Aramaic Lord's Prayer. This is what we found interesting. Many Christians repeat the Lord's Prayer so frequently that it becomes an idle repetition. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as in heaven. Forgive us our sins, Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation. And all that sort of stuff, right? Okay, so many Christians repeat the Lord's Prayer so frequent that it becomes an idle repetition. To some, its words become like those described by the poet Stephen Vincent Benet, who spoke of words we have used, kept in the pocket, rubbed shiny with use and forgotten. This is partly because the familiar English translation, which many have come to love so much that they would be loth to use any other. They'd say, "Oh, God forbid, we're not going to use that one." Today, archaic or obscure. We do not use words like hallowed in our everyday speech, and heaven has no generally accepted meaning. Yeah, because that's probably Shakespeare speak, Romeo and Juliet speak. Yeah, our Father, whom art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Yeah, it sounds very Shakespeare-ish. Okay, so a second reason why the prayer is sometimes said thoughtlessly is that in one or two places the Hellenistic Greek in the original manuscripts of the two Gospels is quite difficult to translate. It is not surprising that the two versions in the Gospels of St. Matthew and St. Luke are different and that obscurities are present in both, for both are translated into Greek from an original Aramaic record. Okay, so it would have been translated into the Koine Greek, which is more akin to the Aramaic, and then probably from there translated into the Attica Greek, or Attic Greek, or Hellenistic Greek, perhaps. All of the scholars who have engaged in the translation of the Greek manuscripts of the New Testament have become aware of this original Aramaic idiom that lies behind the Hellenistic Greek in which they were written. Sometimes its Galilean directness shows through the urban Greek, like honest homespun cloth, through a newer and more transparent garment. Sometimes, on the other hand, it is barely perceptible. Always its presence is there and cannot and ought not to be disregarded. Aramaic was a dialect of Hebrew that grew to be almost a separate language in Aram. The forefather of the Arameans. Yeah. A geographical region, also an area. Well, that's where they dwelt, right? The descendants of Aram. Yeah, he's in the Genesis genealogy record. In Genesis, obviously. A geographical region roughly coincident with modern Syria and northern Palestine. By the 5th century BC, it had spread very far from its source, and records show that it was used in areas as far apart as the Nile Valley and Euphrates. Probably a common trade language, right? Because they traded with probably the Egyptians, the Phoenicians, and so forth. Okay, in Palestine, it slowly replaced Hebrew as the language of the people in the 4th century BC. The books of Daniel and Ezra were obviously written in a period of transition, because in the oldest manuscripts some of their sections are in Hebrew and some in Aramaic. But by the beginning of the 1st century AD, the Hebrew scriptures, when they were read in the synagogues, had to be translated into Aramaic in order that ordinary people should understand them. These translations were called Targums, and the Hebrew language by then had become an ancient classical language known only to priests, scribes, and scholars. Yeah, because apparently the Hebrew was to be spoken in the temple, synagogues, etc., and the Aramaic is for all holy reasons, right? And the Aramaic was spoken on the outside for everyday contact, social chat, whatever, and other things, right? By the 1st century AD, Greek and Aramaic had also become the two great parallel languages of communication used by Jews over the whole of the Greco-Roman world. Greek was spoken by the more highly educated, the educated and privileged, I guess, but Aramaic was the tongue of the ordinary people, like the fishermen and all that, a language of international standing and wide diffusion. One of the most astonishing archaeological facts is that until recently no written Aramaic of the 1st century AD has ever been discovered. Yeah, well, that's because they haven't looked at the Church of the East, right? And and the original ancient, very old manuscripts in the Galilean Aramaic that Thomas handed over to the church that he founded, the Church of the East, right? And they hid it from the Roman Catholics, Islam, therefore preserving it for 2,000 years, and it was intact. Nobody messed with it, right? Nobody changed it, translated it into other languages like Greek or Latin or anything like that. Okay, but what's his name? The Emperor Constantine at the time, a Christian pagan, wanted to get hold of it, destroy the people, etc., according to the history, and basically Islam just wanted the land. They could all live under Islamic rule and peace, but no idols, all that sort of stuff. Okay. So it was there, just didn't know about it. This may be one of the reasons why Jesus put so much of his teachings in a poetic form, easily committed to memory by his disciples, since otherwise it would have been lost. Okay, so you must be aware that there's something there, right? In the present century, however, there have been rich finds of papyri in Palestine and Egypt, some in Aramaic, but very few in Aramaic of the 1st century. Written Aramaic of the 4th century AD exists, as does written Aramaic of the 4th century BC, and from the changes in the language over 8 centuries, it is possible to guess what the language was like in AD 1. Until very recently, this always had to be a guess because 8 centuries are a long time. For example, if an attempt were made to devise an English like that, written in the 16th century, from a knowledge of the language in the 12th and 20th centuries, the results would be far from the truth. Fortunately, Aramaic has not changed as much as English, so the guesses that were made are nearer the truth, and today they can be supported by a few recently discovered examples of Aramaic writing of the 1st century AD. The search for Aramaic documents is important because all Christians would like to know what were the actual words of Jesus, and that's why you watch the Ministry of the Real Truth. Okay, who brings you that? The original, ancient, very old Galilean Aramaic New Testament manuscript, translated in English, the nearest English equivalent, staying faithful to what those manuscripts originally say, by native-born Aramaic-speaking translator filmmaker Victor Nimrod Alexander, okay, who hasn't added his own twist, prejudice, bias, or flavour to it. Okay, that was his mission. So that's what we are bringing to you. Okay, the search for Aramaic documents is important because all Christians would like to know what were the actual words of Jesus. We express so much of our personalities in the language we use, and there are subtle qualities of mind that translations always destroy. Yeah, lost in translation. Is that right? Yet in England today we hear the words of Jesus only as they come to us through their translation from Aramaic into Greek, and then from Greek into English. What is surprising is that the light of his personality shines as brightly as it does through dense barriers of foreign words in the haze of the centuries. Their sublime simplicity, their poetic perfection, and their deep human quality echo down the corridors of the years to such effect that millions of individuals have come to feel that they know Jesus as a person whose perfection does not stand in the way of their love. The almost complete absence of written Aramaic documents of the 1st century makes it difficult, but not impossible, to do what a few Semitic scholars have succeeded in doing, to retranslate the Gospels from the Hellenistic Greek back into Aramaic that they hope is close to the original. Yeah, and most apparently have botched it, according to Victor E. Alexander, the translator. A few scholars have done this, each using a slightly different guess as to the nature of 1st century Aramaic, but the combined work makes it possible for the ordinary man to read, if he wishes, an Aramaic version of the Gospels. It is now generally agreed by historians that Mark was the earliest of the Gospels to be written, and that the others made use in different degrees of Mark in compiling their own records. There is much evidence that Mark made use of an Aramaic oral or written record, and this evidence reveals that the Aramaic was sometimes translated into Greek in a mechanical way. This is often revealed by a retranslation, and it is then possible to write an English version closer to the original. Many examples of this are given in the pages that follow. Well, Victor and Alexander getting hold of the original ancient, very old manuscripts from a high priest of the original church, while today's version of the original Apostolic Church of the East, and translating it into English using a modern vernacular, the root words of a modern vernacular, apparently, to translate what he states or found to be the Ninevite Aramaic. Okay, it's not the Syriac, the modern Syriac that everyone else boasts that they know, or that they think that he's, using, or the Peshitta, and he's getting it all wrong. They know better than a native speaker. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more, right? Okay, they don't know, because they haven't gone deep enough, as we have, to read his, well, it's now down on the website, but we resurrected it. We found that that's what he was saying. Okay, that he met a high priestess, is why he translated from the Peshitta or the Syriac. It's wrong, or that's wrong. He's probably saying the Syriac's wrong, when originally it was from the original Galilean Aramaic. Okay, so he brought a Bible style or Bible format of those original manuscripts, and then he translated those originals into the nearest English equivalent, again staying faithful to what those ancient scriptures actually say. And as he stated on his website, we would have covered this in another video, it's the original ancient, very old Aramaic, okay, which is very different from today's modern vernacular or modern Galilean Aramaic, if there is one around. Okay, it's very, very different. But you get a lot of people online saying, "Oh, he's not saying the Lord's Prayers properly. He's saying Avon. It should be Abon and all this sort of stuff." They learnt in the institution. He learnt natively, right? Maybe he was raised to speak it, or maybe he learnt it from his countrymen, something like that. I'm not really too sure on that one. Okay, so the lack of written scripts in the 1st century Aramaic and the obscure scripts of earlier and later centuries make it very difficult to write Aramaic in any modern script which gives an approximation to the sounds of the words as they may have originally spoken. Fortunately, much of the Aramaic of the Gospels is in rhythmical and rhyming verse, and this helps in the invention of a script nearer to the original. But modern Semitic scholars write Aramaic in scripts that are very difficult to follow by the ordinary reader, and this has unfortunately meant only too often the Aramaic has only been read by scholars. One of the reasons for writing this book is the author's desire to make available to quite ordinary Christians something of the quality of the teaching of Jesus as this is displayed in the Aramaic he used as a vehicle for his thought. It will be necessary for this reason greatly to simplify the script of the scholars. No doubt some will complain that this has led to an inaccuracy, but no one knows for certain how Galilean Aramaic was spoken. So the result of speaking the words of the simplified script used in this book may well be as near to the original speech as attempts made from a more literary script. A very good introduction to this new way of looking at the Gospels with fresh eyes is to look at the Lord's Prayer as recorded by St. Matthew, when this is written in a simplified Aramaic script. This is given below with the rhythmical stresses marked. Okay, we'd like to ask Victor N. Alexander if he sees this, exactly what Aramaic is this. Is it the Galilean Aramaic that he knows of? He translates his translation into English from, the nearest English equivalent, or is it some sort of Syriac? Because it looks very different from his text or the script on his website in the audio video section of it. Okay, because it looks like he says Avun de Bishmaya, and this one here seems to say Bunan de Bishmaya. Okay, Yikadas Samak Tete Mal kutak tebe sibionak. Okay, we're not going to try and attempt anymore because we probably don't have the right pronunciation of it. Not too sure. Yeah, he says avon de bishmaya, and this is saying bunan de bismaya. Not really sure. Okay, so maybe he can clear us up on that. And it says here, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And he quotes on his website that this is not what it actually says. Okay, because God cannot lead you into temptation. Okay. Our Father which is in heaven. Yeah. Thy kingdom has come, thy will has been done. See, it's completely different to the Aramaic. We should have put up here the Aramaic and compared it. Maybe we can do that, or put that under this video. We'll have a think about that. Okay, here's some more here. As soon as this is read aloud with the accented syllables as marked, the strongly rhythmical character of the prayer is seen, as well as the 3 lines rhyming at the end with ak, with 3 more with n, and these 2 groups of the 3 rhymes interspersed with 2 rhyming pairs ending in a. The use of rhyme in the Lord's Prayer is the more remarkable since Hebrew poetry hardly ever makes use of rhyme. Yeah, this looks like it's coming from the King James Version. Yeah, this is the modern Lord's Prayer. You can tell it's probably King James Version because of the wording, which art, hallowed. Okay, it sounds like Shakespeare speak, so we think that's the modern King James Version, right? Or the King James Version. Okay, there's more information here on that. There's a little evidence that rhyming verse was more often found in Hebrew poetry of the 1st century than later centuries, and an example of this comes from the recent discovery, or in that era probably, in his time, the discovery of 2 versions of the prayer repeated daily by devout Jews, the Shemone Esrei. This prayer, called the 18 prayer, because of its 18 stanzas, is found in many manuscripts, but 2 recent Aramaic versions of the period of Gamaliel II show from their context that they must have been written before the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, and then copied 30 years later. One of these manuscripts gives a Palestinian version of the prayer, and the presence of rhymes and rhythms, very similar to those shown in the Lord's Prayer, is another indication of the kind of Aramaic poetry that was written in the first half of the 1st century in Palestine. The 5th stanza of the prayer can be put into English rhythmical form, and it is then as follows: Bring us back, O Father, unto thy law. Bring us near, O our leader, unto thy service, and make us return in repentance before thy name, because we know that thou art the greatest of all gods. In Aramaic, the rhymes and rhythm can both be plainly seen in the following rendering. An appreciation of the rhythm and rhyme in a poem like the Lord's Prayer can sometimes be of assistance in the understanding of the meaning of difficult words. For example, the Greek word in the Lord's Prayer that has given most trouble to biblical scholars is the adjective epiousios, the word used to describe the bread which is given to us, semeros or today. The adjective epiousios is translated as daily in the authorized version of the New Testament, but the stark fact is that the word epiousios has not been discovered in any Greek literature of the 1st century of any age or of any other age. This is a startling fact that little was known. It's probably the Latinized Greek, probably from the Latinized form of Greek. That's probably why they got problems. Not too sure on that one. This word epiousios epiousios, whatever that word is, could either be a word that the earlier Christians invented, epiousios. This word epiousios could either be a word that the early Christians invented, or more likely one they took over as having a special religious meaning from contemporary speech or literature of which no record remains today, and more important still, of which no record remained in the very much larger store of Greek writing available to the scholar Origen in the 3rd century. Origen supposed that the word was invented out of epi, meaning additional to, and ousia, meaning substance. He concluded that it referred to bread, which is close to the substance of life and shares therein. This meaning is clearly very different from the English translation daily. Some further light is shed on the matter from the writings of St. Jerome. Pope Damasus asked the greatest Christian scholar of the 4th century, St. Jerome, to make a codification of the various Latin translations of the scriptures which were then in use. So that's probably what it was. Latinized form of the Greek. St. Jerome did this with constant reference to the original Greek and Hebrew documents, and the outcome was the Vulgate version, Latin Vulgate, of the Bible used by the Church with succeeding millennium. In current Latin versions, St. Jerome found that the Greek epiousios was generally translated by the Latin quotidianum. He was obviously not very happy about this and puzzled by the word, so he compromised and translated the same Greek word by quotidianum in St. Matthew and by supersubstantialum in St. Luke, going on to explain that the supersubstantialum he meant above all substances. In his commentary, St. Jerome refers from time to time to a gospel to the Nazarenes in Aramaic, which must have existed then, but of which we now have no trace. We do not therefore know if this gospel was a translation from Greek into Aramaic or an original Aramaic document. In any case, the loss of this gospel is a serious one, because it would have taken us much nearer to the sense of the actual words by Jesus, since in the 4th century Aramaic, even if somewhat changed, was still a very wide use over the whole of the Middle East. Probably not lost, it's probably hidden away in their vault, right? And just make it, it's lost. Yeah. They don't want you to see it, etc., for different reasons. But we do have the very relevant remark of St. Jerome that in the Gospels to the Nazarenes, Christians are asked to pray for maha, bread. St. Jerome points out that maha is Aramaic for tomorrow or for the future, so that epiousios, bread, must mean both physical bread and spiritual sustenance. This note of St. Jerome reminds us of the many other references in the teaching of Jesus to the bread of life, that he was the bread of life, etc., and to his use of this phrase on a particular occasion that is very revealing. A group of listeners to Jesus once asked him, as they did on several other occasions, to give a miraculous sign of his divine power. On this occasion they said, "Our fathers did eat manna in the desert, as it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat." Then Jesus said unto them, "Verily, verily, I say unto you," or Amen, Amen, yes, yes, true, true, I say unto you, Moses gave you not that bread from heaven, but my Father giveth you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he which cometh down from heaven, and giveth life unto the world. He's talking about himself. Then said they unto him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. He concluded with the words, He that believeth on me hath everlasting life. I am that bread of life. Your fathers did eat manna in the desert, in the wilderness, and are dead. This is the bread which cometh down from heaven, that a man may eat thereof, and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live for ever, and the bread that I will give is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. Okay, so maybe not eating his flesh, not necessarily. Maybe that was the part of the sacrifice of him on the cross. He gave his flesh, okay, to save all sinners. Okay, made that sacrifice. Okay, shed his blood, etc., for all sinners. In the Lord's Prayer, Jesus must want us to pray both for our daily bread and for this bread of life. And we might not have known this apart from Matthew's use of an unknown Greek word which forces us to guess at an Aramaic original. Another difficult sentence in the prayer is, lead us not into temptation, because it seems to imply that God behaves less generously to his children than a normal father who would surely not lead his children into temptation. The Greek word translated by lead is irenebis, and no one could quarrel with this translation. But if we retranslate the Lord's Prayer into Aramaic, the most appropriate word to use is telenin, because it rhymes beautifully with pasanen, and this is a word that could be rendered into English by abandon as well as by lead. This at once makes sense of the phrase, for it becomes abandon us not in the time of trial. This was in fact the English translation given by Benjamin Wilson, who in 1902 produced a word-for-word translation of the Griesbach recension of the New Testament published by Fowler and Wells in New York. Here, retranslating into Aramaic gives us more reasonable meaning than a literal translation from the Greek. In versions of the Lord's Prayer that are not derived from the earliest manuscripts, a sentence is often added at the end of the prayer. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. When this is retranslated into Aramaic, it is at once clear that neither by rhyme nor rhythm can it be seen to belong to the rest of the prayer, and so must be a later addition. Where the agreements of textual and linguistic lines of argument helps to give a more accurate record of events and sayings recorded in the Gospels than was possibly in earlier centuries, we benefit greatly as this is the case by using them. And so forth. So they probably added bits and pieces to it over the centuries. And what is this? Poetic Teachings of Christ. This is supposed to be in the Aramaic, is it? It's more on the Hebrew Aramaic Hebrew. To the original words used in the first century, there have been added the overtones of the spiritual experience of the early church, which early churches are talking about. In the Gospel records, we must necessarily expect to hear two voices, the voice of Jesus speaking in Aramaic, and the voices of many courageous early Christians speaking in the Greek of Antioch, Alexandria and Rome. Okay, this is where Peter went. He went to Antioch, and then he went to Rome and he was martyred. So did he speak Greek? Did he learn Greek? When we listen to them both, we are indeed listening to the voice of the church, but at different times and for different purposes. We may want now to listen to the Aramaic voice and now the Greek. The tension between Jewish and Greek thought has proved to be a most fruitful tension in the life of the church, and it is valuable for us today to see the two sets of ideas that produced it and to look more closely at the languages of Aramaic and Greek in which they were expressed. Fortunately, the total darkness of the loss of written Aramaic of the 1st century AD is just beginning to be relieved. For among the papyri found in 1945 in Palestine, called the Dead Sea Scrolls, there were only one or two in Aramaic, and one of these has recently been dated as belonging to the 1st century AD. Until these scrolls were discovered, the longest Aramaic sentence of the 1st century we possess came from an inscription discovered by Sukenik in 1931. It was on a stone burial tablet only 14 inches wide, dug up in Jerusalem, and it read, "Here were brought the bones of Uzziah, king of Judah. Do not open." This stone marks the reburial of a Jewish king, and its dating by scholars as being of the second half of the 1st century suggests that it was the work of Herod Agrippa II, who, like his father, tried to be both a good Jew and a good Roman. It was who helped Vespasian to destroy the rising of the Jews against the Romans in AD 66 by sending him a corps of 2,000 of soldiers, but after the destruction following the war, he seems to have wanted to recover the good opinion of Jews and began rebuilding in the area of Jerusalem. We know something of the character of Agrippa, for he was on a visit to Festus, governor of Caesarea, when St. Paul was brought as a prisoner there. Festus, Agrippa and Bernice His sister all listened when, at the invitation, St. Paul told the story of his life. Agrippa's moderation is shown by his disagreement with Festus, who says that Paul's great learning is driving him mad. Agrippa says, "This man might have been set at liberty if he had not appealed unto Caesar." The picture drawn of Agrippa in the Acts is consistent with his earlier attempt to offset his pro-Roman reputation by restoring some of the damage done in Jerusalem and by reburying the bones of Jewish kings whose tombs had been violated. Since 1931, when written Aramaic of the 1st century was first seen, every year has brought to light papyri, codices, palimpsests that have all included some Aramaic of the 1st century and that have filled in with written records that gap between the fairly numerous Greek manuscripts of the Gospels of the 3rd century and the date when the original compositions from which they were copied were written between AD 50 and the close of the 1st century. Between the resurrection of Jesus and AD 50, written records, if they existed, must have been in Aramaic. The oral records were certainly in Aramaic. Probably both the oral and written records put on papyrus or copper or skin in Greek were a translation from Aramaic, or the works of a scribe thinking in Aramaic but writing in Greek, probably Koine Greek. And it is this probability that encourages biblical scholars to re-examine the records for evidence of the Aramaic originals. In all of this recent archaeological work, there has been a convergence of testimony from discoveries made by digging of ancient sites, the study of lapidary inscriptions and coins, the linguistics analysis of early manuscripts, and the textual study of all written records. This convergence of evidence is such that even to the skeptical mind, both the authenticity and integrity of the New Testament record is seen to be more firmly established than ever before. Chapter 2, Aramaic words. The existence of a strong Aramaic background to the Greek Gospels might only have been known to biblical scholars after years of patient research. Apart from the fact that the most ignorant reader can see for himself that this must be so, since on several occasions the writers of the Gospels found an Aramaic word so difficult to put into Greek that they left it in the original Aramaic. And there it is for us to read. These Aramaic words were often put side by side with the Greek. One is bound to ask why this was done at all, and if it was done on some occasions, why not on others? What made the 7 examples of Aramaic left in the Greek Testament so unusual that this was done there and not in other cases? Obviously, it will be revealing to look at each case in turn with this question in mind. The only example of a complete sentence in Aramaic that has been retained is in its entirety is the last, or one of the last, that Jesus uttered before he died. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." Okay, is that Syriac? That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" of which they've translated wrong. Okay, it's been rendered wrong. That's the 2nd and 3rd generation Arabic and Greek transliteration. Okay, because he says, if this is Aramaic, or even Syriac, this is the name of God, okay, a name for God, or as we covered in other videos, El, sometimes you might see Eloi, okay, which might hint that they've used the Hebrew, not really sure. Okay, but if this is God, right, or my God, okay, in the Syriac, then how could it become this? Okay, if in our other video where we've covered it, it says Il Lama Shfat Thani, or whatever it was in the other video, right? Can't recall top of my head. According to Victor N. Alexander, the Aramaic translator, it doesn't mean in any way, my God. This is correct, my God. Why hast thou forsaken me? That's incorrect. Okay, because God doesn't forsake you. It's when translated, there's a word wherefore, which indicates he is, why have you left me? Yeah, not forsaken me. Why have you left me? Okay, for that which he was sent to accomplish, right? To die on the cross, shed his blood for the sins of all mankind, right? So come back to God, etc., etc. Yeah. This translation into Greek seems to raise no difficulty. So why put in the original Aramaic? In addition, there seems to be no particularly Aramaic idiom or subtle overtone of meaning that the Aramaic especially provides. The sentence is the well-known opening sentence of the 22nd Psalm, where David cried out to God because he felt that he was alone, he was abandoned. Yeah. God wasn't hearing him, he wasn't listening to him, and he wasn't giving him an answer. This psalm, taken with the 23rd Psalm, forms one of the greatest and most moving prayers in the whole of the Old Testament. So it's basically that psalm in Psalm 22, it's like 22 verse 20 to 21. It's Christ in the New Testament is crying out. He's recalling that verse, okay, that David uttered. Okay, the sentence is the well-known opening sentence of the 22nd Psalm. This psalm, taken with the 23rd Psalm, forms one of the greatest and most moving prayers in the whole of the Old Testament. It is a psalm that would be familiar to all Jews reading the account of the crucifixion. One can only guess at possible reason for including the Aramaic sentence in the record, because that's why he cried out. One reason may he cried out in the Aramaic, not the Greek, or the Latin, or Tamil. One reason may have been that the 22nd and 23rd Psalms were favourites of Jesus, often repeated by him in Aramaic, not Hebrew, and so the inclusion of the sentence in Aramaic would bring back to the memories of his disciples after his death the very tones of his voice. Okay, because he was a direct descendant of David. Okay, so that's probably why he also quoted it. This opening sentence in Aramaic would also trigger off in their minds all the sentences that followed, for they would know these by heart in Aramaic but not in Greek. This would ensure that they would go right on to the end and not stop it as the modern English reader often does. And at the end of the sentence, which sounds like a cry of despair, but is in fact a cry of anguish that leads on to a cry of triumph, because he did what he came to do. He accomplished it. He finished it. Right? Okay, so there's quite a lot more here. We're going to leave it at that. Okay, you could possibly go to the source and get this book for yourself and read it for yourself. Jesus was crucified for blasphemy and Jesus was crucified for blasphemy, and long before the high priest of the temple felt that he was making blasphemous claims for himself, they must have been shocked by his nearly blasphemous use of the term Abba in his prayers to God. Yet they should have seen that there is no contrast between this usage and the vivid picture of a God who knows and is interested in each hair on the head of one of his beloved children, and so forth. So we're going to leave it there. We hope that you've enjoyed it. If you have, then please subscribe to our channel, give us a like, add your comments below in the comment section, and then share this with all your friends, family and others. Okay, here's a note here. Something to note. In the 19th century, most biblical scholars believe that with the discovery of the Codex Vaticanus and the Codex Sinaiticus, Christians had recovered the oldest manuscripts of the New Testament that were ever likely to recover, since there existed many accounts of the order that had gone out from the Emperor Diocletian in AD 303, commanding all Christians to destroy their records. Why was that? It was realised that there was a long gap between the 4th century copies of the Gospel and the first Aramaic originals, but because of the burning of Christian documents in the early years of the 4th century, there was little expectation of finding any earlier manuscripts. A closer study of the documents that have survived, which give an account of the Diocletian persecutions, reveal that this burning of records although thorough was not complete. It also reveals that many of the documents that did survive were bought with the blood of countless Christian martyrs. Okay, here's a key. The earliest recorded persecutions of the Christian church were the result of a desire to stamp out a subversive movement which denied divinity to the Roman emperor. That's the whole idea. Why they wanted to burn all these records, kill off all these people, right? Okay, because they had an order to bring all under subjection to the Roman Empire and treat him as divine, okay, as a god. The test was verificatio, whether a man was willing to burn incense at the altar of the emperor. Many refused to do this, and the early Christians were probably decimated by the execution that followed their refusal. But by the end of the 3rd century, the remnant had grown very greatly, and there were by then many Christians in civil service and in the army. But in AD 298, an incident happened that was to trigger off a persecution more terrible than any of those of early years. In 298, Diocletian was sacrificing at an altar to obtain prophecies from the priests about the likely success of a military campaign. The omens were to be indicated by the markings on the livers of sacrificial beasts. On this occasion, and most unusually, no markings could be found. The chief priests declared that this must be because unbelievers were present. Then one of the emperor's bodyguards said that he had noticed some of the legionnaires crossing themselves to keep away evil spirits, and inquiry showed that they were Christians. Diocletian immediately ordered the Christians present to sacrifice or be flogged, and then went off to consider how he might best destroy a subversive movement which had clearly gained a hold on the army and the civil service. The Christians were too numerous to be executed. Even the Romans, who were used to wholesale massacre, hesitated, no doubt, for practical reasons from embarking on such a lengthy proceeding. So Diocletian came to the conclusion that if he could collect and burn all the scriptures on which the Christians obviously set such store, the very basis of the movement might be destroyed and its continuity broken. On February 23rd AD 303, there was posted in Nicomedia an edict ordering that the chief civil officer of every city and district in the Roman Empire should demand the surrender by Christians of all his sacred writings, and these should be collected and burnt. We have some verbatim records of the civil proceedings by which city mayors and the police set about this task. They did so with great severity in the eastern half of the Roman Empire in North Africa, but with much more leniency in the west. Happily so there, because this meant that a number of copies of the scriptures survived through the years of persecution until AD 305, when Constantine, the first pro-Christian emperor and later a Christian himself, was proclaimed Caesar and protected them. Yeah, he said no more killing of Christians and all this sort of stuff. Okay, cut that out. Contemporary accounts of the Diocletian persecution show how clearly and with how much bloodshed the survival of the Gospels was bought. In some regions, the Christians were able to get away with a merely obstructive attitude. This happened at Cirta in North Africa, where the mayor ordered Paul, a bishop, to bring out his scriptures. The bishop replied that the readers had the scriptures and that the mayor's clerk, Educius and Junius, knew them quite well. But the bishop's effort to save the scriptures were unsuccessful, and the record shows that the writings were brought out and burnt and so forth. And it's just endless persecutions. So that was the whole idea. Right, everyone had to pledge allegiance to the Roman emperor because they all said he was divine, or maybe he made it he was divine, that he was a descendant of the gods or a god, or whatever. Right. So they go around and they destroy any opposition, anyone that wouldn't bow down, do what they dictated. There's the history of the Roman state Catholic Church right there. So some people out there who said, we found in some comments underneath books based on the histories of the Roman Catholic Church and their persecutions and stuff. Oh no, it's just hatred of the church. You got this hatred of the Roman Catholic Church, it's all lies. But here is the historical evidence of what they did, or what they were doing, and why. Because they wanted to establish a Roman state church where everyone came and bowed before the Roman emperor, burnt incense in his honour, and treated and regarded him as divine or a god. Yeah, so we're going to leave it there. If you like this video, again, we say please subscribe to our channel. Add your comments below under the video. Give us a like.